So we represent tenants in termination hearings, which you have additional due process when you have a voucher. And I'm just going to say voucher. There's all kinds of subsidized housing, right? There's LIHTC, which is administered by the IRS. There's USDA housing in rural communities. There are many different kinds of vouchers. There's violence against women vouchers. There's veteran vouchers. There's Section 8 vouchers. There's all kinds of subsidies. So I'm just going to probably say subsidy or voucher just to refer to all those. Each one of those, though, has different administrative protections and due process rights. So if your subsidy is being terminated, you have a chance to look at to challenge the termination there within that body. So for instance, the housing authority, right? If they terminate you, you get a chance to look at why, request a meeting or informal hearing to challenge it and confront the evidence and ask questions of the people who are claiming that you have terminated or that you breached the lease or your obligations as a voucher holder.
Is that the end of the road for you?
So no, that's not the end necessarily, but let's say, some people get terminated from subsidized housing for not recertifying in time, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of paperwork that you have to turn in on an annual basis. You have to show that you're still eligible, right? Subsidized housing mostly works, we talked about cost burden at the beginning, it mostly works such that your rent is based on your income and you'll pay a third of your income to the landlord and the housing authority will pay the rest of it, okay? So the landlord who's accepting a subsidy will get one payment from the housing authority and one payment from the tenant. The tenant's rate of rent will change based on their income. So it is, you get a raise and your rent goes up, which is frustrating, but but that's how it works as a general rule. There are different kinds. LIHTC works a little bit differently. But if you get terminated for, say, not doing your recertification, they have to give you a notice. And before they file, you have an opportunity to respond to that notice. And you get what's called an informal meeting, a grievance hearing. It's sort of like an administrative law hearing where there's an administrative official who's going to rule. But what's at stake in that is whether or not the termination will be upheld. So it's additional protections and due process. And you can also potentially file your reasonable accommodations if there's a disability or some of your fair housing or due process rights. You could try to protect them in that hearing. Okay, and that is separate from the court process. Those are federal regulations, and it depends on what kind of subsidy you have, which would determine which regulations they are. So kind of confusing, but anyway, the subsidy protection is a huge part of our practice. And if you know somebody who has one, it's really important to hold on to it, because if you lose it, there's no right to get it back, and it could be years. So this, I won't go, nobody can see this chart, it will be in the slides. I'll just summarize this and to say that it's a very frustrating issue, because not only is there a waiting list to get them, but then you do come off the waiting list. You get a voucher, and you can't find a place that will take it, right? So Just Economics has been doing some work with Thrive. Pisgah has to engage landlords to increase the amount of voucher participation, or landlords willing to take them. And I think they've made some good efforts. And I also think it's something for this group to look at. What can we do to pressure local officials on this issue when public funds are going towards affordable housing projects? Make sure that they take vouchers, but even better, make sure that they set aside units for it, right? It's one thing to say we accept vouchers, and it's another to say these 8 units are going to be just for voucher holders. So it's a conversation. It's a difficult thing to build housing here. I'm not going to say it's always right to do this, but I do think it's important that we make our voices heard on this issue. If we want to increase the amount of vouchers, not only I guess I'll say this, if we have bad rates like this where people are getting vouchers and they can't find a place to use them, unused vouchers, returned vouchers, we get less money from DC. So that means less people in here in West North Carolina are being housed than could be. So it's a huge issue. right? And, the housing authority is aware of it, and they're trying to address it. So it's not like, I don't think there's any bad intentions here, but it's a real problem. And so that's the frustration that we're facing here. That's not the case everywhere where vouchers are returned. Lots of places you wait a long time for them, but when you get them, you can find some place to go with them. But with our market, it is not the case. Substandard housing, our housing stock is really old. There's a lot of very small landlords around here. They inherited a house, they bought a house and moved into another one, decided to rent this one out. And they don't always have the know-how to fix houses or the capital to do it. And so we have a lot of substandard housing here. Tenants have absolute rights to habitable conditions. Habitability is not defined by the statute, but essentially, well, there are some things that we know are uninhabitable, like not having heat, not having water, having holes in to the outside, unsafe wiring. If you think about things that are safety hazards, right? Or that don't meet your basic needs of housing, like being warm, and having water, having running water and things like that. Those are things that you cannot contract around. In other words, you can't do as is leases such that you could say, oh, there's no water or heat, but it's only $500 a month. There are people who do it, and so I've had tenants say, well, I don't care if it's illegal, I'm keeping it. It's like, okay, I understand that, but I guess just so you know, that's not something that a landlord can contract around. They cannot waive their rights to provide a habitable tenancy. And if they are, we can sue them, and they would owe what's called rent abatement, and there might be attorney's fees, and there might be some other things that you can do to collect. So we usually start with talking to the landlord, then we start with demanding the landlord repair things, and then after that, consider legal action. So if it's not unsafe or a basic necessity, there still could be liability under the lease, but it wouldn't necessarily be something you could do. Or it's not something that the breach of the warranty of habitability would apply to, and it can be contracted around. Like you can contract for this one doesn't have cable access. There are things that you might not have to repair. I talked about putting stuff in writing with conditions. The liability for the landlord usually starts on them knowing about it. And if you call them, which is a common thing to do, right? Call somebody when there's a problem, call your landlord. Then you can't prove that you started it. So follow that up with a text message or an email. Okay to call first, okay to be person-to-person communication. Don't have to think like a lawyer all the time. But if you're trying to get somebody to do something and enforce your contractual rights, follow that up with a text. Thanks for talking with me. I look forward to seeing you come over to repair this on Friday, as we talked about. Have some evidence. This is eviction data in North Carolina and Western North Carolina. You cannot see it. I put this slide up here, not to bore you with numbers, but to show you, really, you can see there's a gap where the evictions go way down. And I put this up here just so people will understand. That's the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we had a couple of things. We had moratoriums preventing evictions for lots of reasons. And we also had rental assistance. Okay. Rental assistance is still something that Buncombe County is distributing. They're not taking new applications to DSS right now. They're out of money, or they pledged their money. If you got your application in, they're still considering it. But my point, I guess, is that as a society, we can choose to have a much lower rate of evictions. We have data on that now, and we know these things work. If we wanted to, we could have this many evictions, right? Whatever this is, this many, fewer. We could have fewer people facing the incredibly expensive, incredibly costly process of facing homelessness. And we choose not to do that when we don't invest in rental assistance and renter protections. So I think people would say often to me back before all of this, like, well, what can you do about it? It's like, here's what you can do about it. You can invest resources in the problem, and you can help people stay in their homes until whatever happened to them, they can address it. So, things that give me hope, things to consider, I think, for this group. Right to counsel in evictions, I think, would be really important. I have talked with funders about doing that here, and combining with the city and county to do it. There are pilot programs throughout the country. Washington State, now you have a right to counsel when you're facing eviction. I think when you think about the cost of it and how, the consequences of it, it seems like, and the procedure to it, the fact that you're interpreting contracts, statutes, procedures, having counsel in those things, I think, is really important. And so we advocate for that. I do think more people are talking about affordable housing. It's way up here, but 10 years from now, the eviction rate will be set by the choices we make about affordable housing in our community. And I hear more people talking about it, not enough, but you hear it's impacting more people, right? It's one of those things where it's not just affecting the extremely working poor, it's affecting middle-class families. Our teachers can't afford to live here, So I think I'm hopeful about the politics of that changing. Certainly even in DC, some people are talking about housing. That was just not the case 15 years ago. Our advisory committees, I serve on 2 of them, the Homelessness Initiative Advisory Committee, which works to end homelessness, and also the Affordable Housing Committee. I think those are the citizen body committees. They report or serve at the county and cities as advisory boards for them. And I think those are good meetings to follow. Those are good opportunities to talk to people on those committees and see what's going on in your community. I hope that technology will make housing cheaper. It's not working out right now, but you always hope you see some of these pre-built. I don't know how to do it, but there's certainly some housing costs have gone down, at least before we had the inflation and some of the chain issues. And then, of course, the Tenants' Right organization, right? These things, there's success stories throughout the country about people coming together, people with different backgrounds who have different issues coming together to fight for each other with what they have in common, which is they are tenants here and they know it's not good enough. It's not, what's happening right here is just not good enough. And looking to work together to organize to do something about that, seeing what's possible. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer some questions. 4:45. So, and then you have a presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
So I work with young adults in this community and just Western North Carolina in general. Do y'all have presentations community focused ones towards first time renters?
And I think we're doing things to address the lack of funding gap from DC. I'm really excited about we had the National Alliance to End Homelessness come in and do this presentation. Dogwood Health Trust paid for them, and there's going to be some low barrier shelter coming in. There's going to be, and what this is really going to do is allow us to apply for more grants that are about housing first. So right now Asheville's not competitive in some of these things, and part of the recommendations from the National Alliance to End Homelessness were pointing some of these things out. So they're changing the governance structure. It can be kind of boring stuff, but I think it's going to make a difference for our community. So. Yep.
So how hopeful are you about the pending maybe legislation that we will end the discrimination against those what we call a source of economic source of income discrimination?
Yeah.
Right? So there seems to be, I've lived here a long time. There seems to be a little more movement than I've seen before. Do you feel like that might be?
I know that the city is considering the city of Asheville is considering it. I don't know how far along. Charlotte has source of income discrimination policies. I think it's great, and I think it's key in trying to eliminate the stigma that we know is part of the issue. And I think it's awesome to hold people taking public money, whether federal, state, local money, and make sure that they are not discriminating. So, and that's kind of what it does. So I think it's valuable, and I support it, and I hope the city takes it up. I think it's limited in that a lot of that's already the the case, and it doesn't apply to private landlords, right? Which is really the problem. Yeah. So you have to kind of create incentives on the front end, and that is and there also has to be a way to police that. I mean, one of the things is, like, the city will say you're gonna do this, but there's no enforcement mechanism. There's no monitoring, So I think when this group is starting to look at advocating, like thinking about those things up front, like, okay, how are we gonna monitor? Who's gonna be checking 4 years from now if this developer actually has those units, So I think it's important. I think source of income discrimination is real. I think we should do something about it. I wouldn't put it high on the list of things that, like, I would, if I was gonna fix this, I wouldn't put it number one, but I think it's being done in other places in North Carolina. I don't know if there'll be a court challenge to it or not, probably. Our highest court is not friendly in the country or the state, so who knows? Long-winded way of answering that. We've got to incentivize private landlords to do it. Right now, when you take city money, they are assigning agreements to do that kind of thing. And I think it's more about just holding them accountable and getting stronger language on what they are promising to do.
Agreed.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm gonna hang around, so I'll be here after.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much, David.